Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, a year after the fall of Bashar al-Assad.
A year ago, Syria's then President Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia after rebel forces seized control of the capital, Damascus. And this marked the end of a brutal dictatorship that had oppressed Syrians for years.
A new Syria is taking shape. But what challenges remain for its people? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hi, everyone. Our conversation today on Syria is a reflective and at times poetic one. So as you're watching, leave us a comment letting us know what this episode evokes for you. And if you're listening, leave us a review on your podcast app and let us know where you're listening from. We love hearing from you.
I'm Leila Nachawati, professor of communications at the Department of Communications of Carlos III University. I'm a specialist in communication and conflict, and I am the author of a novel entitled When the Revolution is Over, Cuando la Revolución Termine.
Leila, welcome to The Take. You know that Syrians are marking 1 year since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Many people are using the occasion to finally go home.
I'm happy. It's an indescribable feeling. I'm happy to be seeing my family. My siblings grew up.
Some to resettle, some just to see it with their own eyes again. You were able to visit for the first time in 15 years last July. When you landed, what was that moment like? What was it like to walk those streets again? And what did you notice?
Well, it was hard to believe. It felt like a dream. I went with my parents. My father is from Damascus and my mother is from Spain, from a small village in the north of Spain. And she lived there in the 80s, in a very dark period of Syria. But she grew fond of the country. And when Syrians took to the street in 2011, my mother was standing in solidarity with all these Syrians she had met, and were now taken to the streets to demand their legitimate rights. So it was very exciting for us because when I started writing about Syria, actually I grew up between Syria and Spain, but even in Spain, I never wrote about Syria. Mm-hmm. And I was a writer. And I was an analyst, and I was a researcher for Middle Eastern issues, but always surgically avoiding any mention of Syria, which was kind of awkward, kind of professionally problematic and awkward. But I did avoid it to protect my family there and to avoid any backlash. So when the revolution started, I told my parents I need to start writing. I can't keep, stay silent when people are risking their lives this way to demand their rights. And so my parents told me, yes, you go ahead and write about Syria and talk about Syria. But we will not go back to Syria until the revolution is over.
Wow.
And the dictatorship is no longer there. So we committed to that, and other people did go and maybe faced risks, but I did not go for 15 years and neither did they. So it was amazing to actually be able to go back and not feel this sense of fear and terror that the airport of Damascus conveyed. The airport of Damascus was a place of terror. I mean, anything could happen and you never knew when or how. It was very arbitrary. So that feeling had disappeared and it was really, really hard to believe. And so being able to go without that on our heads and just like hugging my uncle, my oldest uncle is almost 90. And we had already given up on him and my father hugging again. And they did hug. And
oh, Leila, that's so lovely to hear.
Yeah.
What was daily life like? Things like prices, services, checkpoints. Did it feel like a country in transition or more like people just trying to survive under this new reality?
There is hope on the one hand. There is a lot of pain on at the same time. And there is the hope that the sanctions against Syria can be lifted. That would be a nice measure, because Syria is completely isolated. I was reading some research that the sanctions against Syria are among the most twisted, intricate in the world ever applied to any country. And they did not meet their goal of isolating the regime in terms of financial. They still had resources. They turned Syria into a narco state. They lived off the money of drugs and corruption.
The proliferation of Captagon through the Middle East is just one of the enduring impacts of Syria's civil war. The drugs were a vital source of cash for the heavily sanctioned government.
So the regime didn't suffer financially, but the people did. So it's urgent that Syria becomes part of the world again internationally. The SWIFT code, the access to international banking, and then gradually the inflation. I mean, was crazy. Like when I went to Syria 15, 20 years ago, with 10 pounds, I could buy just a piece of bread. And now for that same piece of bread, you need 10,000. Not 10 pounds, but 10,000 pounds. So people go around with plastic bags full of, cash and they're worth nothing, but people are carrying around.
Leila, you're bringing up some interesting points that that show the complicated challenges the country still has to face. Have you talked to people in the diaspora, people who have had to flee, refugees who have made that determination that they wanted to go back?
Yeah, I know a few people, a few friends who decided to go back to Syria, different cities, from Damascus to Aleppo to Hama. And I think Syrians are very attached to what their country means. It is actually, if you put aside all of the horrific politics it's had, it's actually an amazing country with an amazing history. It's, of course, when we say it's the cradle of civilization, it's amazing. It's the where the alphabet, the first alphabet was born in Ugarit, the first musical notation. There are people there who still speak Aramaic, which is, a dead language, but it's still spoken there. And it's such a unique richness and diversity, and the food is amazing. And the people are generous and kind and are so warm, and they open their hearts and their doors to whoever is visiting. So I think it's a privilege to be able to visit Syria. And I also have some Spanish friends and some friends from other countries that are actually going there to visit and just see by themselves. And I could not have dreamed at a certain point that this could be happening.
In those first few weeks after al-Assad was ousted, there was so much talk of roadmaps, transition councils, new beginnings. Fast forward to today, and you just published an article entitled 10 Key Points About Syria, 1 year after the fall of the regime. So before we dive into some of those things, give us the big picture. How different is the political reality from what activists and opposition figures were imagining back then?
There are back and forth, and there are lights and shadows, like with every process. And I don't think this is something that can only be understood by reading Syria as a country, but by reading the whole region. Like having such neighbors, each of them have their own interests, and they're all trying to impose their different interests and agendas on the Syrian people. So it's difficult to progress and move on within any internal process when you have so many threats from regional and global actors. So that's something that I think we're all concerned about, that neighbor, that southern genocidal neighbor that has so much impunity to actually continue occupying Syrian land and sabotaging every internal process so that they can get stronger and expand their land there. And Syria is being pushed into signing the Abraham Accords. But since when do you demand from an occupied people and the occupation, and then we'll see. But because this is happening, Israel continues to bet on chaos and more pressure and more seducing, trying to seduce minorities so they turn against the government. And I think they will be very happy about another civil war happening in Syria. And this is a horrific scenario, of course, for anyone who cares about human life. There was a consensus by most Syrians that the regime had to go, that the regime had caused so much pain, that there was this moment of happiness a year ago and sheer celebration. But 1 year later, we can see there is increasing polarization between Syrians who are reasonably happy and satisfied by the current transitional government, and other people who are really increasingly concerned, alarmed, or even openly against this government, referring to it as a group of people who want to stay in power and will not fulfill their promises of this being a temporary phase. So there is this increasing polarization. There are the open wounds from decades of wounds, and then the most recent wounds of the massacres in the Sahel.
Hundreds of people from Syria's Alawite religious minority have been killed in the worst violence there since the fall of dictator Bashar al-Assad.
And in Sueda.
Sueda spiraled into chaos. The beating of a young Druze man triggered a wave of retaliations.
And these two wounds have been so deep and so unbearable that they have pushed many people and many communities to step further away from the current authorities and completely distrust them. So there is this increasing division and polarization that I'm particularly concerned about.
We'll have more with Leila after the break. Well, Leila, so you term it as an open wound. So let's talk about that open wound, because I mentioned your latest piece published in the Spanish newspaper Público, and in it you explained how Syria has had this rich religious, cultural, and ethnic diversity that for decades was weaponized to divide people and to ensure loyalty for the government by turning communities against each other. So that open wound, 1 year on from the fall of Assad, how has the new government, led by President Ahmed al-Sharaa, fared in that respect? Do you think it's healing?
I'm not sure. I think we're far from a process of healing. I think just being from Spain, a country that has faced huge issues with its own memory, we still have mass graves that have not been investigated, where people lost their grandparents and they're still waiting for someone to confirm your grandparents were buried here, just to be able to move on and to do some closure. So imagine how incredibly challenging and difficult this process can be for Syria. There's this thing that some countries are using for a few years now, which is the DNA identification for forensic identification. And Syrians don't have anything like that. So having teams of forensic researchers or experts that could actually provide this technology, training in this technology, would be incredible, because there are thousands of people who have been found that they're impossible to identify. And there are others that nobody still knows their whereabouts. And the people who were released from these huge extermination camps was like a small percentage of the total of people disappeared. People don't have answers about what happened to their relatives, and that is very difficult to deal with. It is very difficult to move on as a country, as a people, as a society, when you don't have answers for that. So this is something that organizations like Syrian Families for Freedom, led by women, and I can't stress enough how much of this amazing work of reconciliation, reparation, identification, and justice, transitional justice, actually has been done by women, has been led by women. Women have been at the forefront of the work for memory, justice, and reparation for years, since the beginning of the revolutionary process. And they are insisting on the current government to take this matter seriously. For example, the way documents are dealt with is quite careless. You go there to Syria, and at the door of every detention center, you see this, people with documents and pictures, and people come by and see if their relatives are there. I mean, that's not a way to address a process like that. You need effective and professional documentation, archiving who's who, what happened when. But this documentation we don't have, families don't have, and even the prisons, some have been burned down. But you can't burn down the prisons because there are evidences there. There are messages that detainees wrote for their families, or pieces of their clothes. Imagine what it is for a mother to have a piece of the sweater of her daughter.
Yeah. Leila, you have just raised so many really important points there. So I want to take time with each of them. I want to get back to the integral role of women in just a bit. But you brought up a name that some people will find familiar. That's Sydnaya Prison. For those who have not been as tuned into this story, they may not recall the very gruesome, the images and the stories that many people learned about for the first time a year ago about Sydnaya Prison. So remind us, what did we learn? What happened at that prison?
Yeah. So in this case, 2 security men from the prisons were actually compiling photographs for years, and until they could flee the country, and actually make sure these documents were safe and could be used for evidence. And these documents, the Caesar files, were so gruesome. They are connected to a law that was passed a few years ago called Caesar Act law, which was an intensification of the sanctions against the Syrian regime as a punishment for this discovery. And now there are new documents coming. There are several journalists, several media have published the secret files of Damascus. And just to give you an idea, I mean, I have a few acquaintances who are actually finding their relatives in these pictures. Imagine having to find your loved ones in these archives that are sent to the world. That's how tough, how difficult it has been for Syrians.
When we talk about reconciliation, justice, holding people accountable, how central have women been in that work? And who? Because I'm particularly thinking of someone you've written about, someone you also call a friend, Noor Ghazi. She's a Syrian human rights lawyer who spent years fighting for detainees and for Syrians who disappeared during the war. And she's also the widow of Bassel Khartabil. Tell us about Noura and Bassel.
Yeah. I was actually campaigning for Bassel when that's how I became closer to Noura. I was campaigning with Global Voices and other organizations for the release of Bassel, because Bassel was a Syrian Palestinian engineer, software developer. He's considered one of the fathers of Syrian internet freedom, or the fight for internet freedom. And he met Noura during a demonstration. So they became known as the lovers of the revolution, and they were going to get married. And they just imprisoned him for years. And later on, she found out that he had been killed just for participating in demonstrations. But I think more than anything, for being a central figure for the future of Syria. Because if you pay attention to the past, it is not the armed groups or the terrorist factions that the Syrian regime has really focused on. The biggest problem for the regime was actually peaceful activists, engineers who are actually trying to build a new idea of what Syria could be, and that was actually a threat. So Bassel and Noura were the symbol of everything Syrians. It was a mirror to see yourself at the best part of being Syrian. And she was an amazing lawyer. She was also the daughter of very good human rights defenders. And Noura speaks about this from a legal point of view, in addition to being a victim herself. So she has a lot of authority. Many of us look up to her. And she's been actively denouncing lately, and I think we all should, this wave of kidnappings, dozens of women, particularly from the Alawite community, have been kidnapped in the past few months in places like Tartus, Homs, Hama, by armed men. And it's unclear whether these are acts of personal revenge, whether they are sexist, patriarchal, maybe revenge against the Alawite community, of course, using women in this abusive way. But we know that they've been mistreated and in some cases raped. Amnesty International has been reporting about this, and many others are actively demanding from the government that they take this issue seriously. In some cases, the government has said that these are fake, that this is not an issue, and it's something that is key. It's crucial to take it seriously.
Wow, Leila. Before I let you go, I have to note that among the many hats you wear is that of a novelist. You wrote a fictional story about the Syrian uprising called When the Revolution Ends that was published in 2018 and is about to see a republishing. Is that right?
Yes, it just
You're
was
relaunching it
republished
now.
a few months ago. Yes.
You were relaunching it. And so at the end of the book, your main character is a teenage girl who was born in 2011. She is, spoiler alert, she is able to return to a free Syria.
Yeah.
And the date that you set for that was 2025.
Yeah.
Very prescient.
Yeah.
How do you reflect on that coincidence now?
Well, I wanted my baby from 2011, not mine, the baby from 2011, to actually be a teenager and be able to go to Syria as a teenager. So yeah, this is the year I established and see what happened. And it's interesting because the title is When the Revolution is Over. This is a sentence that Syrians kept repeating. Not only Syrians, but Tunisians, Egyptians, they kept repeating, بعد الثورة, بعد الثورة. Like, I will get married, بعد الثورة. I will finish my degree, بعد الثورة. You put your life on hold. Everything
After the revolution.
Yeah, because before the revolution, you need to focus only on that. I have a few friends, I think. This sounds better in Arabic, but Arabics are very romantic like that. Maybe it sounds cheesy in English, but they were said, I cannot get married because I'm married to the revolution. But then years and years go by and you need to get married or finish your studies or just whatever, continue your life. So many people put their life on hold, and 15 years later, I mean, it's amazing because this new edition actually has a new epilogue reflecting on this, but people could actually go back after 15 years. And I don't think this is something we're giving the relevance it has. I hope this novel contributes to memory of the process that Syrians have endured, because I don't know of a people who deserves more justice, dignity, and freedom than Syrians.
Well, Leila, thank you for bringing those voices and those stories to the page and to the world. I really appreciate you. And thank you for having this conversation with us.
Thank you so much, Malika. It's been my pleasure.